Today I paint a box, I wash a man, and I throw out a case of AK Inreactive paint. Here I'm using a 2-to-1 ratio of acrylic thinner to paint. I'm attempting to lay down a thin transparent coat in order to simulate shadows on the lower hull. This is a 1-to-1 ratio acrylic thinner to paint. You'll notice here that despite having just cleaned my airbrush, my paint is spitting and throwing down a very uneven coat. I can't fault the quality of the paint. The fact is they just spent 3 months on a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I do my best to salvage what I can from these paints. After all, they were my favorite. They just have colors that I can't get here in Japan. As I move on to the turret, I continue to progressively get lighter with the shades of paint that I apply. You can see here how wet the coat looks. I had to use a lot of thinner to get the paint to spray right. I'm using a post-it note to create sharp contrasting lines, and it's a quick mask to prevent overspray. This is my first attempt at modulation, and to be honest, I think it looks a little bit cartoony, but it could just be that I'm doing it all wrong. You'll notice here that it looks extremely stark, but when I move into weathering and start applying washes, it'll tone this down a lot. I picked up this technique on YouTube the other day. The idea is that you black base the figure and then hit it from the top with white paint. This will create a variation in the base coat, giving depth to the figure. Here, I'm attempting to apply the base coat. The paint just doesn't seem to want to cooperate. In order to get the paint to flow smoothly, I'm forced to thin it down so excessively that it's virtually uncontrollable. Despite the issues that I'm having with the paint, you can see that the pre-shading paid off in dividends. Here, I'm attempting to mix a lighter shade of paint for highlight when this happened. It was at this point that I knew I could no longer trust my AK Inreactive paints. I'll continue to use them throughout this build, but unfortunately, I'm just going to have to throw them away. Here, I'm adding depth by applying darker shades to the recesses of the figure. Now I'm adding contrast by applying lighter tones to the raised portions of the figure. I'm also using a dry brush technique, and I'm using my fingers to blend the paint. I'm using Tamiya Panel Liner Brown to add another layer of depth. Because I'm right-handed, I find it easier to flip the figure upside down while painting the opposite side of the face. I'm not too worried about being neat because I can always cover up my errors by adding more OD green. I've added some red paint to the flesh. This adds another layer of depth and makes the figure appear more dramatic. After completely giving up on the AK Interactive paints, I switched to Mr. Hobby and mix a light shade of OD green to dry brush my figure with. It's not the best looking figure in the world, but after being out of the hobby for almost 10 years, I'm happy with it. After black basing these crates, I had a translucent layer of deck tan before applying a coat of AK's filter for brown wood. I gave the filter some time to dry and then added a coat of enamel wash for wood. Notice how I'm constantly dipping my brush in white spirit. Keeping my brush clean and the filter wet really aids in the blending process. This step really brings out the wood grain in the model and brings the crates to life. Attaching the accessories is very satisfying. It lets me know that I'm getting close to my favorite part of the project. the weathering step, where I get to cover up all my mistakes. I've decided I'm going to make this a 3-part series. This video is already 20 minutes long and I still have another 20 minutes worth of video to process. But please enjoy this preview of the completed project. Like, follow, subscribe, and please join me next week as I transform this Sherman into a battle-hardened war machine.